Well, good evening, friends, and welcome back to Real Life Stories. This is our fourth night in our 5-night series, and we are super excited to have you here on our digital platform. And I'm hoping and praying that these stories have been a blessing to you, that they've been an encouragement to you. Maybe they've even challenged you in your walk with the Lord. And so tonight we have another great story for you, and our friend Amy Doherty is going to come and introduce our speaker tonight.
Tonight, it is my pleasure to welcome my friend Teryn. Teryn and I have been friends for a little over 4 years. We've shared life experiences together, but most importantly, we have walked with Jesus together. You may know Teryn as the science teacher here at the preschool. It blows my mind how smart and creative she is. You may also know her from Bible study. Either way, whenever she walks into the room, she lights it up with her smile and her beautiful mind. God has blessed Teryn with the gift of obedience and patience. As you'll hear in her testimony tonight, she has obeyed God's calling to do whatever and wherever God needs her. She is also blessed with the gift of gathering. Both her and her husband have opened up their home with a humble and generous heart. They've made people feel welcomed and loved. The list can go on for a long time, but I will end with this. She is the ultimate Proverbs 31 woman. Please help me to welcome my friend, my dear friend, Teryn Jeyarajah.
Hi, ladies. I'm so excited to talk with you tonight. I have to tell you, I have to be honest, that when Lisa asked me to speak for Real Life Stories and said that it was going to be different than how it normally is, instead of speaking in front of people, I would be speaking to a camera, I was definitely a bit hesitant. As my friend Amy had said, I teach science here at the school, and when everything happened and the kids couldn't go to school anymore, I was making videos. And so I would set my camera up on my tripod, put the kids upstairs, and every time I'd start recording, I had a hard time. Even with just, hi, it's Miss Teryn here, so excited to do science with you today. And I would mess up so many times. And one time I heard my son yell down from upstairs, how come you're saying the same thing over and over again? And it was because I had to do like 50 retakes just to say my name. So just give me grace tonight, and we're just going to do the best that we can with the situation that we've been given. But I got to tell you, when Lisa asked me, that night I went to bed, and I was just praying, and I was praying and asking God, please give me the words. Just give me the words that you want me to share with others to get my life across in a way to show how much that you have been faithful in my life. And I went to bed, and within minutes, my mind was just racing. Probably not the right time to pray that prayer because I was trying to ignore it and go to sleep, and the thoughts and the memories were coming so quickly that I was like, oh, right, I need to get up and start writing it. So I grabbed the first thing that I had nearby, and of course, this is what it looked like. It was a little Star Wars notebook. This was the closest thing I had. So I'm writing. I only get a few thoughts because the page is only so big. And then a few nights go by, and I say the same prayer. And again, the same thing happened. And so I grabbed the closest thing next to me, a little bigger, but this is what I had. And it was the Mickey Mouse book. So all my notes got put in this at like 2 a.m. And then a few nights later, same thing. You'd think at this point I wouldn't be praying the prayer, but I was praying every night. So at least I had a big paper here to write on, but as I started going through it, if you'll notice, there are unicorns and kitty cats. And this is what I had. So I learned, note to self, get a grown-up journal, right? So lesson learned. But with all that being said, I just really hope that tonight you guys get a takeaway from all the faithfulness that God has shown in my life. Okay, so starting with my childhood, I am a family of 4. I'm the youngest. My brother Sean is 5 years older than me. Both my parents were born and raised in Hawaii. My mom is Portuguese, and she was raised in Hilo. And my dad is Russian, Chinese, Hawaiian, and he was raised in Maui. And they met here in the mainland in Spokane, Washington, at Gonzaga University. So they decided to raise my brother and I here, but all of our extended family is in Hawaii. And what that meant is for the holidays, we really just had each other. And so we got very close to one another. We would spend it with the community of friends that we've made here, either through school or church, but we really were a tight-knit family. I was raised Catholic. I come from a very strong line of Catholics. My parents both went to Catholic schools their entire upbringing. My grandparents attended 6 a.m. service, Mass, 7 days a week for 30 years. And whenever I'd go and visit Hawaii for my summer break, even as a teenager, I was up at 5:30 a.m. going to Mass with my grandma, because you don't tell your Portuguese grandma that you're not going. And so I remember, praying the rosary very often with my family. My dad still prays it every day today. My parents are in the choir that they've been in for 40 years, every Sunday. If we ever were on soccer tournaments or traveling, we'd have our game and would make sure to find a church on Sunday so that we would attend. I come from a line of uncles who are deacons, priests. My aunt's a Franciscan nun who her convent was across from the Vatican in Rome, Italy. So very long line of Catholics. And so I went to Catholic school my whole upbringing, from kindergarten through 8th grade. The only time I did public was high school, and which I'm very thankful for. I remember being raised in the Catholic school. There was definitely a community of, I guess, what I felt protected, and I didn't know what public school was going to be like, a lot of unknown. And when I went, I had such a great learning experience and met so many people and really learned about diversity there and how people walk their lives in different ways than I had seen before. And for college, I chose Seattle University, which is a Jesuit Catholic school, and then again for graduate school. So I've mostly been in a Catholic setting. Growing up, I was very close to my mom. She was definitely who I'd consider my best friend, who I would want to come home to if I was excited about something or sad about something. She was really my spiritual partner and leader in many ways as well. I gained a lot of wisdom from her. My dad is a very silly guy. He's definitely the most fun grandpa for my kids. But my brother and I would basically always feel like we had another sibling because he was so silly. I'm sure my mom felt she had another kid. He's definitely just always the life of the party. This was actually in May. We decided to drive over to Spokane to celebrate my daughter's 5th birthday with my family, and this is how we were greeted when we pulled up into the driveway. And now you might think this is special or unique, but this is just everything he already had at his house. He didn't need to get anything or pull it together. This is just normal. And growing up, this was birthdays, this was sleepovers, this is how he woke us up with our friends. Only there was usually underwear on his head, and he'd ask if anyone had seen his underwear. This is just normal, right? Thanksgiving, Christmas, a Monday. So it was normal. And for her birthday, my parents had installed a dance floor because they tango dance in our basement, and we set up a photo booth. And I just got to say, we did that photo booth for probably 2 hours off just my dad's dress-up clothes. So that's pretty much my childhood. And it's fun for my grandkids, but as a kid growing up, super embarrassing. So needless to say, I had a great childhood. We were a close family, so much that my mom actually was my maid of honor at my wedding. And I luckily married a man who had similar interests and closeness with his family because he asked his father to be his best man. So we both come from a line of just seeing the importance of family. So when I went to college, I left Spokane and I went to Seattle University, and I was studying biology pre-dental. I thought from the age of 10 that I wanted to be an orthodontist. I was sure of it. I told everyone I knew that that's what I was going to be. And I was taking all these science classes and math classes, and I was determined. And then sophomore year, a friend of mine came up to me and said, hey, there's this thing called the Calcutta experience in India that we could go and volunteer with Mother Teresa's Missionaries of Charity. And when she said that, I felt this, the only way I could describe it, like a fire inside me, which I had never felt before. And it was strong, and it was intense, and I knew with all of my being that I needed to go. And it wasn't like any other study abroad program. There was no credit, there was no professor or adult that went with you. You just went, you took the time off school, and you just volunteered as needed. And I knew I was doing it. I knew it. And so when I went home and I told my parents, and they heard that their 19-year-old daughter wanted to go to Calcutta and work with the poorest of the poor And I mean, dial-up was just starting. There wasn't cell phones. There wasn't any way to connect. I really didn't know where I was going to stay until I got off the plane. They said no. And I was a really obedient child. I had never been grounded or anything. And I really spoke up and I said, I'm going. And my dad said, well, just don't give her the money. And then she can't go. And so I raised all the money. And I remember it cost $4,100 for me to go. And I wrote every family member and every friend, and I babysat, and I made all the money I needed to go. And so by the time it was getting ready for me to go, my parents had been in a lot of prayer, and they came to a time of acceptance and just really feeling like, okay, she's going to do this. We need to get on board. And the other day, as I was going through some of pictures and letters that I wanted to find for today, I found this book, which my mom put together, all the letters I wrote, and they wrote us when I was gone, and pictures and things. And I found this letter that she wrote the day I left. I'm going to try to not get emotional with this. Okay, she said, I didn't tell you, but the day you left, I was at home with my thoughts, cleaning your room and bathroom, and washing your clothes. Wow, it took all day. So basically, I left a mess. But it was good to keep busy and be alone with my thoughts. I was so worried for your safety, and I said, Lord, she's going so far. This is what came to me right away and remained with me through the day and stays with me even now. You all have to endure this for the blessing. And my mom would always tell me, you have to do this for the blessing when things got rough or hard. And after the fact, we've learned this was very much for the blessing. He took care of me in many ways, which I want to share with you today. So I went there, and before I left, my aunt, who is a nun, she wrote me a letter. And in the letter, she said, let me find it for you. Because she was a little concerned, as was all of my family. They were all questioning, why do you need to go to India? We have poor people here. We have sick people here. We have people in need. Why do you need to go there? And I just felt with all of my being, that is where I needed to be, and that whatever lessons God wanted to give me, I needed to leave my comforts. I needed to be pulled away from just volunteering somewhere, serving somewhere, and then going back and sitting on my couch and going to the grocery store and having everything that I need at my fingertips. He wanted to do more, and I knew it. And so my aunt wrote me this letter, and she said, try to copy Mother Teresa, who saw Christ in everyone. Sometimes that is difficult. Sometimes that is a difficult task because his disguise is so good. And there were so many people that I saw there in really good disguises. And it was easy for me to either ignore or walk away or be frightened of. And that's just really stuck with me because that's something that I still have today. Recognizing that Jesus can come to us in so many different disguises and to not be fooled by that. So the first place when I got there and I got off the plane, I just went to the Mother House. And I happened to arrive the day that Mother Teresa, the 1-year anniversary of her death. And I walked in with my bags. I had no idea where I was going. I didn't know where I was going to stay that night. I didn't know anything, really, except just the little information that previous students had shared with us. And I said, I'm here to help. And so the first place they sent me was the Gandhi School. It was a school where each day I would walk the streets to find my students. And I'd gather them, and then we each had a little picnic table, and that would be our classroom. It was just a room with walls, and we'd all line up with whatever students we could get that day. And I quickly realized when I'd go to collect my class for that morning, I'd get dirty looks from the parents sometimes. And I wasn't sure why, because if they came to school that day, we would feed them, we'd give them clothes if they need to, or mend them. We were trying to help educate them. Why were they giving me dirty looks? Or why were they not allowing their child to come? But I realized the days that I took them to school meant that they couldn't beg for their family. And if they weren't begging for their family, then they weren't getting the money they needed for food and such things. I first started volunteering here, and this little one right here grabbed my heart really, really quick. And I wanted to, with all of my heart, adopt her. And I wrote home, and I said, I want to adopt this little girl. And I was 19 years old, and she came with 4 sisters. And my parents were like, Teryn, please, enough already. But when I looked further into it, at Mother Teresa's homes at the time, you had to be married. And I wasn't obviously married at the time. But it just broke my heart to not bring her home with me. She really connected. And from that point on, I just really felt no matter what, I will be adopting from India, because I could see I'm going to have brown babies, and I know that without a doubt, they will have Indian blood in them. And I just knew it. And for whatever reason, I don't know why, but I only thought that could be achieved through adoption. I didn't think there was any other way but adoption. And it wasn't until 14 years later, when I was pregnant with my first son and married to my Sri Lankan Indian husband, that I realized that God was going to give me brown babies. And that he is in every detail. And he was so faithful to know my desires from years ago. Just wait, Teryn, they're coming. You know? And that meant so much to me. So I started at the Gandhi School. And then one day I was having breakfast, and a nurse who volunteered her time there every few years from San Francisco came up to me, and she knew as a biology major at the time, and so she said, listen, I know you have some biology. There's this place at Kalighat, which was the home for the dying and destitute, and there's this patient there, and I need your help. And this place I had kind of avoided. I felt safer with the kids. I felt safer teaching, but I hadn't experienced death right in front of me before, and I knew that would happen here at Kalighat. And so I was a bit hesitant to do it. And yes, I had taken biology, but like I had dissected a pig. You know, I don't know if I'm ready for what Kalighat was going to bring me. And she said, listen, I need you. And so we went there. And if you'll notice, on the front steps right there is a body. There's a brown blanket over it. And when you'd enter the door, they would have the bodies that had passed that day piled on top of each other. And then there'd be a board that listed how many deaths there were that day and how many open beds. Because each morning, they'd drive around and they'd find those who were left at the street or abandoned on the train, who were truly destitute and dying. We'd pick them up and take them here to care for them. And when you walk in, you'd have the bodies piled on one side with extreme heat, right? So there's a lot of smells going on, mixed with curry that's being made, because the curry and rice are being made, mixed with urine and feces from the patients and everyone that's around. So it's a strong smell. And I remember walking in and having to swallow my vomit and thinking, God, I don't think I can do this. And I just felt this push. And my mom told me one time that the only way that she could get through it with me being gone is that she started a prayer group, and there was a bunch of ladies in her house, and she would just pray and pray and pray. They'd all pray for me, and that she didn't watch TV, and she didn't listen to the radio, because she used every moment to pray, especially in her evening time, because she knew that that's when my daytime was starting. And I remember telling her I could feel it. And I'd never been able to feel someone's prayer before, but I'd be walking down the street or at this moment when I was in Kalighat, and I could feel a pressure. It felt like a hand on my back pushing me. And I remember walking down the street by myself one time, and I was going to veer left. And I remember feeling the push to go right. I don't know what would have happened if I went left, but I remember just having the presence of Jesus on me and the power of prayer. So I told her, whatever you're doing, keep doing it, because it's working. So I walk in, and she proceeds to take me to bed number 13, where there was a man laying there. At this point, I was still fairly new there, so I hadn't learned too much Bengali or Hindi at the time. And of course, that's all he knew. And he saw me, and he was saying, namaste, namaste, as he's laying on his mat. And then she pulls back a dressing, and there's a hole about this big in his ankle, where it looked like someone had tried to cut it out, scoop it with a spoon, and you could put like a baseball in it. And it was infested with hundreds and hundreds of maggots. And she said, what I need you to do is take all the maggots out and burn them. And I, I was kind of at a loss for word. I wasn't sure if that's something I could do. And I remember looking at his leg, and you could see all the maggots crawling under his skin. So you saw his skin moving and coming up into his chest. And she said, if they get into his lungs, he will die. I need you to push them out, push it all the way down, out the hole, pull them out, put them in this bedpan, and light them on fire. And so I sat there, and for the next 5 hours, that's exactly what I did. I just kept pushing, and I was causing him so much pain. I know I was. We had no medicine. There was nothing to numb it. And tears were coming down his eyes, but all he was saying to me was, namaste, namaste. And tears were coming down my eyes, and all I was saying back was namaste. And I couldn't believe how he was letting me do this to him. And so it was getting dark, and it wasn't necessarily safe for women to especially be traveling in the evening at this time. And she comes to me and she goes, we got to go. And I said, but I'm not done. There's still more. And she said, yeah, but it's not safe. If we're going to take a bus back, we got to go now. Just cover the wound and we'll pray. And I didn't want to leave him. I wanted to stay overnight, which was not allowed. And so I stuffed gauze in it, and I wrapped it, and I left. And so that night, of course, I went home, I prayed. I couldn't wait until the next morning. As soon as it was, we got on that bus and we headed right over there, and I went over to bed number 13, and I started to undress the wound and pull it out. And when I did that, there were no maggots. The skin looked like fresh, new skin, where it was the day before was gray and looked like dead tissue, and it looked like fresh flesh. It was pink and red, and it had started to come together. I didn't see any maggots under his skin, and there were so many the night before that I know were still in there because I could see them when I left. And I was shocked. And I went to Sister Lou, who's the head sister, and she is a firm nun. And I said, excuse me, Sister Lou, did you give bed number 13 something, like some medicine? And she was busy doing something, and she didn't even look up at me, and she was like, no. And I was like, well, maybe anything, or did someone work with bed number 13, maybe while I was gone? And again, she didn't look at me, and she was like, no. And she was working on another patient. I could tell I was irritating her. I could tell I was being very disruptive. And I looked back at number 13, and he's just smiling at me, and his wound looks like it has cleared and is healing in a matter of hours. And so I looked back at her, and I said, Sister Lou, and she turned to me, and she stopped what she was doing, and she was like, what is it? And I was like, I'm just wondering, bed number 13, he had that massive wound with all the maggots, and now there's no maggots, and it's looked like it's come together. And she said, did you pray? And I said, yes. And she goes, so, get back to work. And that was it. And it was as simple as that. And I just realized that was the power of prayer. Those were God's miracles. And on that experience to Calcutta, that was one of many that I experienced. I couldn't not leave Kollegat. After that, I started volunteering there every day. I loved coming. God gave me the strength to do it. This is part of the women's ward over there. There was about 50 women on the women's side and another 50 on the men's side. And this is one of the women I worked with. And when I went, another restriction or guideline that my parents had said is, here's your masks, here's your gloves, here's everything to protect yourself. I had my own syringes, I had medicines, I had every supplement you could imagine to go with. Like, everyone just had a backpack. I had a backpack and like a first aid suitcase from my mom, right, to be able to go. And I went there, and I was fully covered, and I had everything. And especially, as a female, we weren't wearing tank tops or shorts, even though it was hot. We were trying to cover as much as we could. But I was also, I realized that we were also some of the last people that were ever going to touch them. And I was rubbing, I don't think it was this woman, maybe another woman, down with oils and lotions with my latex glove. And my mask, I was so hot, I was dripping sweat down on her. And I hated it. I hated that this person couldn't feel a human touch in their last moments. And I hated that I couldn't give that to them. And I said, God, if you want me to do this work, take care of me. And I took everything off. Now I know at this climate of time that we're in right now, that's maybe not necessarily the thing that God's wanting us to do. But at that moment, that's just really what I felt moved to do. And do you know that I worked with these patients every day who had tuberculosis, who had all kinds of different infections and diseases, and I didn't get anything. And I was touching them and rubbing them and bathing them and feeding them and changing and dressing them, and I got nothing. And after I was spending some time in Collegot, I decided to go to Shisha Bhavan after that. And Shisha Bhavan is an orphanage. In my ward, there was 150 kids, age 2 and under. And there were 2 Indian women to take care of them. Now, look at that teacher-child ratio, right? Like, that is not legal here in the States. But there, it was 2 women for 152 and under. And there was a room just lined with metal cribs, which I'm sure had all kind of lead in them, like probably not the safest. 2 babies in each crib. And when I'd go there, we had to bathe them and feed them. And I quickly learned if you make a circle with them like this, you can feed like this. Because you'd feed in shifts and move on, because you had 150 kids to get through. And there were no toys, there were no color crayons. There actually was none of that sort. All these kids wanted was human touch. And so I learned how to hold 9 babies at one time. I wonder what that looks like, but if you sit down and put your back up against the wall, make a V with your feet and a V with your arms, they each could find a spot to lay. And all they'd do would just swarm me, land me, and fall asleep. That's all they wanted to do was that human touch. And so my heart just sunk here. And this is where I wanted to be. There was no other place I wanted to be. And my friends would go and travel and do some things because they encouraged us as volunteers, go out, get some fresh air, go up to the mountains, travel a bit, and come back. But I had a hard time leaving. And finally, my time was coming to an end. My friends had already gone to the Taj Mahal, which I really wanted to see. And I said, okay, I got to go. Now's the time. And I found a phone, called my mom, and said, listen, I'm going to go, and I'm going to go on my own. I felt comfortable at the time. At that point, I had traveled some, and I felt that this was something I could do. And so I got my train ticket, went back to the room where I was staying, and got horrifically sick. And I hadn't been sick at all the entire time I'd been there. Now, other people that I'd been there with or made friends with had malaria. One person had brain malaria. The parasites that my friends got there, they were then studied for 2 years later at the UW because of how bad it was. They had lost so much weight, you couldn't even recognize them. My mom made me eat more food before I left because she assumed I'd lose weight, and I didn't lose a pound, just to let you know. But I didn't get sick at all, and that, right after I bought that train ticket, I got horrifically sick, and I couldn't leave my room, and I didn't make it on the trip. And I was in my room for quite some time. There was no TV, there was no internet, there was no newspaper or access to the outside world, so I didn't know what was going on. And then during that time, I guess my grandma, who was in Hawaii, was watching CNN at the time, and it came up that there was a train crash, a horrific train crash that was in India. And she called my mom, and she just said, tell me Teryn's not traveling. My mom said, actually, she is. She's on a train. My grandma had told my mom that a train that was bound to Calcutta, which was actually my train, had collided with 6 derailed coaches that were lying its path due to a broken rail. And at that time, there wasn't much information about it. It just looked devastating. And my mom's heart just sunk. And at the time, she didn't know how many survivors there were, how many injured. There wasn't much information being shared except just some really frightening images. This is one of the images right here of that train. And I had no idea. And my mom and dad had no way of contacting me. There's no leader of this. There's no phone. There was no phone where I was staying. I had to walk like a mile to get to a phone. So they had to sit and they had to wait. And my mom said that she remembers during that time just having so much hope and feeling that I was okay, even though the images that were being shown to her contradicted that, but she really felt that, and so she just held on to that, and she didn't let herself think anything other. After some time, I come out and I hear of this horrific wreckage, and after further investigation, I do realize that it's my train, and in the days to follow, we learned that over 200 people were killed and 150 were injured or trapped inside. And it's considered today as one of the worst train tragedies of India. Now, mind you, I only got sick one time in Calcutta, and that was the one time. So I go back to volunteering. Oh, let me tell you this. I finally get to a phone, and I call, and I remember the sound of my mom's voice. And she said, "Teryn," as if I was in trouble, and she was so excited to see me, right? And then it was just a lot of tears. But God was faithful. He was faithful during that time to my family, and my family was faithful to them. And I had no idea what was going on. Then we volunteered for a little bit more, and my friend and I said, let's go to Nepal. And we went to Kathmandu. And there they had the opportunity to go white river rafting. And so we went and we got our tickets for the bus, because you have to take a bus down to get to the river. And they said, be here at 7 a.m. So I set my alarm, the alarm that has gone with me everywhere, that I had used every single day. And that morning we wake up and it's 7:15. And my friend gets up and she's like, hurry up, we gotta go, we're gonna miss the bus. And she's running around and trying to, get dressed and pull herself together. And I just kept looking at my clock, because I was like, how did this not go off? It's working, the battery's working, it's not PM, it's AM, everything looks right. And she's like, Teryn, forget the clock, we gotta go. And I just kept looking because I didn't understand why it didn't work. Everything about it looked like it should have worked. And so we get there and they said, well, you've missed the first bus, so you need to go on the second bus. The first bus was full. So we go on the second bus, and just to let you know, this is what the buses look like, and this lane may look like a one-way, but they use it as a two-way. So the buses are coming down as buses are going up, and they just try to make it work. And we were going, and pretty soon we stopped. Like, why have we stopped? And we look ahead, and we see that the bus in front of us had rolled over. And my friend and I looked at each other because we realized we should have been on that bus. And so again, I realized, God, what is going on? Because these were two big accidents, and you're protecting me. And he showed me his faithfulness in that. And now that I'm looking back on it, I'm reminded of Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. And in John 13:7, Jesus replied, you don't understand now what I am doing, but someday you will. And I knew that God was protecting me and preparing me for what he had for me in the future. So needless to say, I don't think God's plan for me was helping people get straight teeth. And so I came back and I realized I needed to switch my major. And I switched to sociology, social work, and completely went on that track. And just to let you know, not one science or math credit transfers for that, and that was private school, so credit to my parents. That was a lot, but I started my track for really working with the abused and the traumatized. And I remember someone came into our class at Seattle University and talked about this place called New Beginnings, a domestic violence agency. And when she started talking about it, I felt the fire. I'd only felt that fire one time before, and that was for Calcutta, but I felt it again. And I knew I had to be there. And so I run back to my room afterwards, and I call and say that I'd like to intern there. And they said, "Oh, I'm sorry, we don't take interns. That's not something we do." And I hung up the phone. I remember just feeling really confused by that because I had this fire, and it won't stop. It won't go away. It just feels like it gets stronger. And I didn't really have words for that or really what that meant. I just knew it was this fire and that I needed to follow it. And 5 minutes later, my phone rings. And it's this woman from that agency. And she said, "Listen, we don't take interns. But I went to Seattle University, and I need someone who can talk well, and I need someone who can write well. And if you go to SU, I know you got that. So I'd like you to be my intern. She didn't know my name. She didn't really know anything about me. But she called me, and so I took it, and I didn't realize who I was interning for. This woman was like the top of the top in our country on chemical dependency and domestic violence. And for 1 year, I followed her, and I watched her train. And in being that, I was part of those trainings, so I was getting certified in everything that she was doing. And I was, now looking back, I'm realizing I was being prepared for those next steps that God had for me by one of the best. And so then an opportunity came up as a children's advocate to work in their emergency crisis shelter. So people who were fleeing domestic violence situations and that needed to go into a confidential setting. This was leading their children's program. And so I went for it, but I was brand new. I just graduated college. It was my first interview. And they called me and they said, listen, we'd really like to give it to you, but there was someone who'd been doing it for, I think it was 10 plus years. And so, of course, they gave it to them. Completely understandable. I knew it was a long shot, but I just wanted to try. Come to find out, I get a call the day that she was supposed to start, and she didn't show up for the job. So I got that job. Ended up being with that agency for 13 years, and God showed me so much during those times and brought so many relationships and experiences to me that showed me his faithfulness. I remember on the first day, now mind you, I'm 21, okay, I'm single, I don't have any kids. My boss comes up to me and says, so you need to teach a parenting class tonight. And I was like, excuse me, what? She's like, yeah, so the children's advocates, they teach parenting classes, and the new session just started, so we need to teach you that tonight. Now, for all you parents out there, if you had a 21-year-old come in front of you who had no kids and who was about to give you advice on parenting, what would you think, right? Like, I'd be out. And so I was nervous. And so I started teaching it, but then I was like, I got to figure this out. And so I did the next best thing, and I lied. I enrolled myself. I'd work all day, and then I enrolled myself in 3 parenting classes at night. And in order to be in those, you had to have kids. So I lied, and I said I did. But I wanted to, have parenting for the toddler, parenting for the school age, parenting for the teen, because those are all the different kids and ages we had at shelter. So here I am. I didn't quite do the math, but I was a single mother of a 2-year-old, an 8-year-old, and a 13-year-old, which didn't really work. I think I had my 13-year-old when I was 8. But I went with it, and after a little while, the instructor, I think she kind of got on to me and was figuring something's not quite right, and so she pulled me aside, and I told her what I was doing and how I was just trying to learn as much as I could, and she supported, and later down the line, we became great referrals for each other. My class built up, her class built up, and we worked together. But in that time, I remember being really frightened, not feeling that I had the knowledge or the experience or wisdom to share in this. And I remember parents would be asking questions, and I would answer, and it'd be a really good answer. And I remember being shocked by it and wondering, where did that come from? I don't remember reading that or learning that, but it sounded really good. And I knew at that time, I knew that God was speaking up for me when I didn't have the words, because he had purpose in what I was doing, and nothing was going to get in that way. I needed to do what I needed to do to gain my wisdom and knowledge here, and that he was going to help and give me that wisdom and those words when I needed it, and I couldn't have it for myself. And so fast forward 6 months later, still a newbie, and I had wait lists for my classes. I had the authors contacting me asking if I'd help re-edit it for it, because they'd never seen such progress and so many people wanting this class. That wasn't me. That was God. That was God's work at hand completely in moving forward. And it helped because before I had my own kids, I taught parenting for 16 years. So that really helped with my own kids and my husband, to be honest. So in my time working at the domestic violence agency, I decided to go back and get my master's in counseling. And after I did that, towards the end of the program, I needed to get my internship. And I really wanted to do something that involved counseling and domestic violence, but really spiritual counseling. And I hadn't done that before. And that's a really hard resource to find. I actually learned spiritual counseling mixed with domestic violence. And I found this one agency that had it. And so, of course, I call them up, and they said, we only take interns from this one particular graduate school, which was not my school. And I was like, would you at least just be willing to meet with me? And I think she felt bad, so she did. And lo and behold, God entered that space, and so I was the first intern from a different school that they had ever had in their history. And I started working there, and I saw when you bring prayer into counseling and you bring God into that space, what he could do in a much quicker or maybe smoother way that I hadn't seen before. And working with people who allowed that presence to come into the counseling session and the space was so uplifting for me, and I learned a lot there. And as my time was coming to an end, once you graduate, before you can be licensed, you have to have so many hours. I want to say it was 150 supervised hours, which you have to pay for. They're like paying for a counseling session. Now, mind you, I work at a nonprofit agency. I just had an undergrad and graduate degree from private universities. Trying to come up with that money, I wasn't sure how that was going to happen. And the director at this faith-based and domestic violence agency pulled me into her office, and she said, hey, I have a proposition for you. I've been wanting to write this book, and I've been sitting on it for 10 years. And it's a book where we teach faith leaders in different communities about domestic violence using biblical context. And I just haven't known how to really go about it or who I want to do it with, but I think I want to do it with you. And if you'll write with me, I'll give you supervision in exchange. Now, that sounded great, and I really understood the domestic violence side of things, but I didn't really have a context or that great of an understanding on the biblical verse. Now, that might sound funny to you or interesting because I was raised Catholic and I'd gone to all this school. I could take a religion class, but I couldn't pull up Bible verses. That's not something that came naturally for me. That wasn't even something that I really remember growing up and learning. I know the Bible stories, but it just wasn't fostered too much in my experience. And so that part I really felt challenged in, and I just felt not capable in that area. But the person who was writing it with me came from an evangelical perspective, and she could pull it up like this. And so that began our process of 3 years of writing this curriculum. And you might think, wow, that's a really long time. But we struggled with the words on trying to enter into these spaces where we had had so many experiences of having a woman or a family in front of us who they didn't go to their domestic violence advocate first, they didn't go to police, they didn't go to their counselor or therapist first, they went to their clergy, they went to their pastor, they went to their priest or whoever that was, and they had been given unintentionally information that further harmed them or put them in harm's way. And we knew it was just a lack of education, and we wanted to give resource and we wanted to give understanding, but we wanted to be able to be heard. And we realized there was a lot of doors that didn't want to open up to domestic violence or, really felt like that was the secular world. And we were coming from different perspectives, and we wanted to bring that together, and we wanted to be able to enter those spaces in their language. And so as I'd write it, I really had the DV perspective down, and those pages came easy to me, but the part on how we could bring it into biblical verse, I was challenged with. And I remember I would be talking about safety planning, and my co-author would be like, oh yeah, Jesus' safety plan's here, God's safety plan's here, and could just pull up all these verses. And I was like, that is amazing. I want to do that. But I just didn't learn the way I wanted to learn at that time, or I didn't have it, I should say. And so time went on, and it wasn't until years later when I got here, and I'll take us there in our story later, but I was sitting here in my first Bible study. I'd never done a Bible study before, and Lisa said, is anyone here for their first time? And this was a large one. There was like 80-something women in this group. And I just raised my hand, assuming there's somebody else. and I was the only one. And I was like, oh, I didn't realize, is this something everyone's doing? And that was my first time. Since then, I've done 9 Bible studies now. And I've realized in doing this and in learning about the Bible and learning the language and the stories from just a much deeper way, in a way that I'm ready to absorb and hear and take and talk about now, God is teaching me all of that. Now, my co-author has since gone on, and she's taken the book and she's been teaching and training, and I really put hold on all that because I literally sent her my last edits and gave birth the same day. And that all went on hold, and she said, you come back when you're ready. And I hadn't felt the fire to until that first day when I was sitting here in Bible study, because I felt God is giving me that other part of my learning to be able to go, and whatever I do or wherever he takes me with it, if he brings me back to that, I know that I'll be stronger in it because he has prepared me. I didn't even know that was going to be part of the plan when I came to these Bible studies. So I had finished my grad school, but something that I had skipped over is in the beginning of my graduate program, I got engaged. I was with someone for 4 years, and he was in the military, and he had gone on different deployments, and he left after 9/11 and went on one that was supposed to be 6 months, but ended up being 18 months. And when he came back, he was not the same person. And I was studying to be a counselor at the time, and so I was trying to empathize and trying to understand and seeing how we could get him support, and it just wasn't going as planned. But I had hope, and I had faith, and I felt that, he had told me he was going to get out, and so this is just something we're going to work through. And then 2 weeks before we were supposed to get married, he informed me that he had re-enlisted without talking to me, Special Forces, and he wanted to do this for life. And I remember sitting in my car and thinking, I love this person. I've made a commitment to this person. Do I just need to stick this out? Is this just, I even to the point of my family all had plane tickets, were coming from Hawaii, and everything's been paid for, and the money that my parents had saved since I was a little girl has all been spent. It's all done. Is this just something I just need to do and hope and pray it works out? And I quickly realized that it was a better decision to leave. Actually, my mom said, my suggestion to you is that you don't walk away from this, but that you run. And I did, and she said, come home. So I called it off, drove home, and I remember just collapsing on the kitchen floor in my dad's arms. And it was the hardest time of my life, because I had a dream and I had a plan and I had invested in this relationship, and you wonder, who am I going to meet, or how am I going to meet another person, or why isn't this working for me? Other friends were getting married at the time. Why isn't this happening? And I just remember feeling really lonely. And I stayed with my parents for a long time. And when I went back home, I lived in a 2-bedroom apartment by myself. And I would cry myself to sleep every night. And one night I was crying, and I very clearly heard, I am here. And I had never heard that before. And it was so clear and piercing. And I immediately felt like this peace. I felt I wasn't alone. And even though it was hard, and even though this was going to be a struggle, and it was going to take time, and I needed to heal, I knew he was there so much that he told me, and I could hear him. And from that point, I started to heal more and heal more. And I dated others, and there were other relationships that didn't work. And through all my experiences, I had built walls. I definitely had built some walls up. And I remember when I met my now husband and we started dating, I remember him saying, you've built a tower of walls around you, and I see everyone else trying to get in through the door. And excuse my language, but he said, I'm going to find a damn window. And he did. He really did. And when I met my now husband, I met him at a barbecue, and I was actually there with my boyfriend at the time. And I had a very brief interaction with him and walked away. I then dated that person for 3 more years. And I later found out that after I walked away from that brief conversation with Nelson's his name, he turned to his best friend and said, I'm going to marry that girl. And so he waited those 3 years. And then he waited the year it took to heal from that relationship. And I mean, if you want to talk about faithfulness, that was him, right? Because I remember him saying to me that in that time, he would pray because he's like, God, I feel this is who you want for me, but what I'm seeing, this is really hard. And so maybe I should just move on. And friends were telling him to move on. And he just thankfully was obedient. And God was there for him during that time to bring us together. Dating for my husband and I did not come easy, though. Finally, after all that time, he was very excited to be together. I was trying to transition to this person that was just ready to go, and we came from very different walks of life. So my husband's from Sri Lanka and born and raised, and he didn't come to the States until he was 19. So that's really the culture that he only knew. I was raised in Spokane, Washington, and I was a therapist, very much lived in the gray. My husband's an aerospace engineer, lives in the black and white, and us coming together was very tricky. Even though we liked each other and we had a fun time together, I remember him describing it as if we were gears, and he's like, we were just off. And he's like, if we can just get on, he's like, I feel like we'd be on fire, but we just couldn't get on. And, you know, when I thought about how are we going to raise children together, how is this going to work? Our upbringings were different. We just thought, this isn't going to work. And so I called him over to my apartment one night, and we both knew the conversation that we were going to have. I remember sitting there, and we were in silence. And I was about to say the words, we need to end this. And before the words came out of my mouth, I audibly heard, do not do this. This is not supposed to happen. Now, I hadn't heard anything until that time years before when I heard, I am here. And I remember as if I'm speaking, but it was all in my head. You know, poor Nelson, he's just sitting there in silence. It was all in my head. And I said, what are you talking about? Like, I have to do this. This isn't going to work. And then very clearly I hear again, do not do this. This is not supposed to happen. And I turned to him, and he looks at me, and I said, I think we should stay together. And he looks at me, and he says, I didn't think you were going to say that. I was like, me neither. Here's what just happened. And I explained it, and both of us, like that, entered the relationship with faith. Because what we could see didn't look like this would work. What we were experiencing didn't think this could work. But we went on faith, and we said, okay, God, if you don't want this to happen, then help us out here. And from that day on, the gears started clicking. And the differences that were such big parts of our relationship that were causing the disruption started to come together, and we didn't see them as such big differences. Now, we were not without challenge, we were not without troubles, but our focus now was not on our differences and not on you this or me this. It was now on our faith in the Lord and what he has for us. And he was right, because it worked out. And obviously he had a plan. And when he said, do not do this, this is not supposed to happen, he meant for us to be together. And that was one of the best days of my life. I know that God handpicked Nelson for me, and vice versa. So shortly after, babies came. We got married in August, and by January I was pregnant. And I had a wonderful pregnancy. Everything went really smooth until it didn't. And I went to give birth and ended up having an emergency C-section. And the reaction that I had to the medication, I don't know if this was physical or mental or what was happening, but I remember being on the table as I was getting the C-section, and I couldn't open my eyes. And Nelson was right here, and he was describing what was happening, and I was shaking. I just was completely out of it, not responding well to the medication, but I kept waiting to hear the cry, and waiting, and I never heard it. And I could tell that my son had been removed, but nothing was happening, and I still couldn't open my eyes. Then I started hearing Nelson praying, and hearing him praying, and I wasn't sure what was going on or what was happening, and my teeth were chattering so bad as a reaction to the medication, I couldn't speak. And what I learned later that I didn't know was happening is that my son was born not breathing, and when they took him out, they were giving him CPR. And my husband said, I was praying because I didn't know how am I going to tell my wife that we've lost him, because that's what he could see. And now, thinking back, I'm wondering if God just made it so my eyes couldn't see, because that's hard. That was a hard image for my husband to live with. And so I didn't meet Nolan until a day later with everything that happened. I got taken back to my room, and the first time that I met my son, Nolan was like this. And I remember just thinking, this is not how this was supposed to be. You know, I'm supposed to give birth, and then he's supposed to come onto my chest, and I'm supposed to have that intimacy with him. And he wasn't supposed to be in this little space, you know, by himself. And I remember I went to nurse him for the first time, and alarms and buzzers and beeps kept going because cords were popping off or not happening. And I just remember thinking, God, what happened? Like, what happened? Everything was so good. And of course, we had so many prayers for him. And he quickly turned around. I mean, within hours, that boy was off every tube and in my room and being held to my chest. And we've never looked back. God was so faithful to us during that time on taking care of our son. And we thought that, you know, maybe with the lack of oxygen, is that going to affect his brain or his learning? And we quickly learned that did not happen. He's healthy as can be. Here's a picture of him as a baby. He got really juicy. That's what we call it, juicy. And this is him this past year starting kindergarten. And everything has been fine. I mean, health-wise, fine. So we thank God for that. Well, shortly after Nolan came, we had another little one. This is our daughter, Violet. And when I was going through pictures, Violet said, why am I in a basket? And I was, and then there was like a box, and then there was like another bucket. There were all these pictures of her and these little things. And I said, listen, I don't know, it's just a thing. When you're little, we want to put you in something else that's little. And I said, don't feel alone, because we did the same thing to your brother, right? There's another picture here. You have that one? There we go. Where she had a little desk, and I couldn't help it, right? I had to do it. And it's so funny, because if you know my son now, this is actually very, like, honest of his personality. So it's funny, but I was like, listen, Violet, don't feel like that's just not a norm. We just did that. But she has brought such joy, and people would always tell me, you know, when she was around, it just brought them joy. Her smile brought them joy. But again, as your walk with God is, he has more growing to do. And when Violet was 6 months old, we were trying solids, and it just wasn't working. But I felt, that's okay. She's nursing fine. Everything's okay. We'll just keep going with that. And then I'd try again later, and she just couldn't keep anything down. I'd try again later, and she couldn't keep anything down. So when she was 10 months old, we took her, and her doctor recommended, well, let's test for allergies, right? And so these are all the marks where we were testing for allergies. And she was a trooper. She was super happy still through it. Everything came back negative. It was fine. So then we tried the next step, and they said, you know, we want to take her to speech therapy, which was funny, because, I mean, it's not really talking, but they wanted to see how her tongue was moving, and they're like, bring some food. And so this next one is we'd be at these different speech therapists with her applesauce and trying to get it down, and it was always coming right back up. So the doctor said, okay, the next thing, you need an upper GI x-ray. And so this is her preparing for that. My husband had stayed home to stay with my son, Nolan, so I was there by myself. note to self, don't ever do that. Bring a friend, bring someone. Because what I didn't realize is the way that they check for the digestive tract is, I don't have a picture of her, so I just had to get a picture of this because I did not take one. They lay her down, and then they put her arms up by her head and strap it, and put her legs down and strap them. Nothing that's harmful to the child, just to keep them so they don't move. But then it rotates, and it fully goes around as I'm trying to give her a bottle of barium, like a chalky substance, so they could see on the x-ray if there's any blockages in her digestive tract. Well, my little girl, who everyone always asked, does she ever cry, was screaming. And I'm trying to give it to her, and she doesn't want any of it. And something that should have taken 10 to 15 minutes was over an hour of her rotating on that and screaming. And everything comes back, and they find nothing. So we've been doing these 3 things, and we keep finding nothing. And the last thing he wanted to do was to put her under and to do a biopsy. And of course, as parents, that's not something we wanted to be done. We were hoping we'd find something else. And everything kept coming up negative, and I just didn't want to take her. And my sister-in-law at the time said, get her into a church. Just get her into a church. And we didn't have a home church. We had been looking. I had a church that I was going to. My husband had one, but we hadn't found one that was a good fit for us. And we had been looking for 2 years, and we just weren't finding it. And a year prior to, we stopped by this one because we drove by this all the time, and he parked the car, and I was like, let me just run in and see if someone's here and see if I can get any information. And when I came in, the sanctuary was full of all these people with like white handkerchiefs on their head or cloths. And I remember leaving and saying, oh, that church isn't for us. And so we searched for a whole other year. Later, I find out that they just rent the space to some other faith communities, and so that was just one of those times that I happened to come in, but it kept us away from this church for another year because of that. And so when my sister-in-law said, get her into a church, I happened to be with a friend at that time who said, oh, we have a friend that goes to this church. And I said, they do? But are you sure? Because I tried that, and I don't know if that would be a fit for them. And she said, no, they go. You should try it. So on Sunday, we packed up the kids, and we came here. And at the end of church, they said, if you'd like prayers, come to the front. And so we brought Violet up to the front, and they prayed over her. And from that moment on, she ate solids with no vomiting, not even once. And we were about to put her under and have her go through a biopsy because we were listening to just the experts and everyone around us. And even though we were praying, being in this space and in this church and with these people in this community at this time, God gave her the healing that she needed. But it wasn't just her. He brought my whole family to this church. And then it wasn't just this church. It was this preschool. And then it wasn't just this preschool. It was some of the closest friends that I have developed, and my husband, and who we spend our time with and walk with the Lord, and it was all here. And the third time I felt that fire was here. Once I walked out those doors, and I was like, do you guys have a school here? And Marcia was here, and Miss Stacy, and they were talking to me about it. I felt that fire, and I knew we had to get in here. So thanks to God's grace, we all got in here and became part of the Mill Creek family. So needless to say, my daughter is healthy and happy and doing just fine. And God has taken us through those experiences. But I'll tell you what, it didn't come without assault. Because I remember when she was 3, we were laying in bed, and she's like, sing me a song to go to sleep. And I picked a song. I said, oh, we used to sing this song to you were little. And I remember it's a song we used to sing to her, and then after a while we started singing it, and she cried every time we sang it. She didn't used to, but then for some reason she started crying every time we sang it. So we stopped. So I hadn't sang it for years. And then that evening I was like, oh, I remember this song we used to sing to you when you were little. And so I sang it, and immediately tears came to her eyes. And they just started coming down her cheek. And I said, Violet, are you crying? Why are you crying? And she said, do you remember that time they tied my arms up like this and my feet like this? She was 10 months old at that time when we did that upper GI x-ray. And I remember, because she was crying so much, I FaceTimed my husband, and he sang to her as she was rotating. And he sang that song to her to try to calm her. But it was enough of a memory that it just brought it back. And that's something that frightens her and causes her pain. And so I just think of that, even as God is there and he's working his goodness, that the enemy is also right there, and that we just so need to be on top of that and binding that and aware of that, knowing that God is bigger and greater. So now I've been a stay-at-home mom. I'd left my work because I went from domestic violence to private practice therapist. And I've been really content in just being a mom. And not just being a mom, it's the biggest job. I shouldn't have said that. But I'm just saying it's the hardest thing, but I've been really happy to do it. And God has just really put everything on hold from that life of working with the traumatized or the abused. And I always tell my friends, I don't know what I'm going to do if and when I go back, because I don't see myself going back to that. And they're kind of shocked in that, because I'd spent so many years. And I said, listen, when I had these babies, a switch flipped. And I don't think I can sit in those rooms or be with those people, hearing those experiences now that I'm a mom. I think it'd be too hard. I think I'd take the stories home. I just can't do it. And I've been content not knowing what God has for me. I've been learning, I've been growing, I've been building community, and it's been fine. And then it came time for kindergarten, and my son's going off to school, and soon my daughter will follow. And so I'm looking at a new season in my life and what that means. And all of a sudden, when he turned 5, it felt like people were coming out of the woodwork. People who were in crisis, people who were experiencing some sort of abuse, people who were either suicidal or having suicidal ideation, people who just needed parenting support, who were really struggling and had challenges. And none of that had happened for 5 years. It was just mommy. And then all these things started coming. And some from the church, some from just outside community. And it was interesting because I didn't know what God wanted me to do with that. And I didn't know how to move forward, but I was willing to be obedient, because I had learned so many times, if I surrender and if I be obedient, he takes care of it. But then earlier this year in January, I was challenged. In January, Nick Goff came to speak at our church. He asked us, we were talking about, how to listen to God and how to discern his voice. And he asked us to do this exercise where he wanted us to ask God 3 questions. And the first one was, Lord, what do you think of me? The second one was, Lord, why did you create me? And the third was, God, what can I expect you to do with me and through me this year? Now, I'm not necessarily a person that has visions or see things or audibly. I have, but it was just those 2 times. And so I was like, okay, I'll sit here, but I'm sure I won't get anything, but I'll just pray and it's okay. And I asked the question, Lord, why did you create me? And I got an image very, very clearly. It was me, and then it was like a black veil, a big black veil, and on the other side of it were children. And I was reaching my hand over and pulling them to the other side of the veil. And as I got this image, I just started crying and crying. And I said, God, no. Please, no. Because I felt with every part of me that he wants me to work with these kids. And these kids on that side, it felt dark. It felt evil. It felt abusive. All the things that when I became a mom, I was like, I cannot do this. I can't do it. And that's what it felt I was doing. And then I asked the question, why did you create me? And I heard, go save my children. And I didn't want to be obedient, and I didn't want to surrender. I wanted to say no and run the other way. Please, not me, someone else. I can support someone else from a distance anyway. Please, not me. And what I hadn't told anyone is for about, I think a little over a month, I had been having nightmares every single night. Horrific nightmares. I had never even told my husband because I didn't want to say them out loud, of abuses and harms that were happening to my children that were very clear. And it was so upsetting. I was waking up every night, faceplant praying on the floor, every night. And didn't talk to anyone about it because I didn't want to say it out loud. And I was like, God, if you want to wake me up or if you want to bring me to you, please bring me a different way. This is so upsetting. And that night with Nick Goff, when I asked that question and I got that image, I went home that night and I went to bed and I didn't have the nightmare. And the next night and the next night. And I haven't had that nightmare ever since. Those nightmares. I haven't had one. And I talked to my friends and I talked to my family about that. And in the wisdom that I gained, they said, what if God was showing you that these are his children, and that pain that you feel as a mother that's happening to your children, like that's the only way he could get you to feel what the pain would be like if you could feel it with your own kids. But my kids are his kids, and all these other kids and those kids on the other side of that black veil are his kids and are the pain that he's feeling. And that gave me some peace around it. Is this something I could do? Is this something I could enter into? And the next week, I think it was, we started the Bible study, Finding God Faithful. Okay, week 1, first week of homework, page 4. Okay, it says, Finding God Faithful, a study on the life of Joseph. Okay, and then this is what it says. In the bottom, in different color ink. Note, if the Lord is stirring in your heart to help fight against human trafficking, there are many organizations doing this important work. And she describes on how I could do that. Now that's interesting, because what I felt what was happening is that he wanted me to work with human trafficking victims, and especially children and youth. And so I have this image, the nightmares stop, and then in a Bible study, human trafficking comes up. It was very random to me and not random to me all at the same time. And the ladies at my table started praying for me over it. And where I was feeling a lot of fear and discomfort, I started to feel peace with that. Now, I don't know where God is going to take me with that. I'll still say I'm hesitant in surrendering it all and being obedient to it. And at the same time, I know that with his strength, he has brought me such greatness. Not my own strength, but through his. And as I was thinking about that and writing this is what came to me. Teryn, when you didn't know how you were going to help the poor and dying in Calcutta, I showed you miracles and the power of prayer. When you wanted to take the lead and do it your way, I protected you and kept you safe. When you thought that helping to make people's teeth straighter was your path, I designed a path for you that had trauma and violence and pain, and showed you my light and my hope in the midst of the darkness, and made it some of the most amazing experiences in your life and brought you lasting friendships. When you thought you were too young or not knowledgeable enough, I opened doors, filled you with confidence, and gave you the words when you didn't always have the answers. When you felt lost and heartbroken, and as if your dreams had been shattered, I picked you up and reminded you, I am here. I surrounded you with both earthly and heavenly angels and brought a man into your life that found a window into your heart. When everything in front of you looked like this cannot work, I shifted your heart and your thoughts and brought peace to the relationship and decisions that lie ahead. When you had your first child and nothing went as you had dreamt, I filled his lungs with breath and brought him back to you. When your daughter battled against the enemy, my home and my church gave her victory. When you searched to the point of exhaustion for the next stages of your child's learning. I showed you clarity and gently whispered, surrender it all to me. When nightmares frantically woke you up in the middle of the night, I brought you to me on your knees. I gave you peace. When you have faced unknown doubt and fear, when things seem to not go as you would expect them, I have shown you my faithfulness, and in my time brought blessings and joy to those areas in your life. Now, like I was saying, when I got asked to do this, I was really hesitant because I thought the day may come where I would share my story, but I thought it would be in front of faces and friends, and this isn't how I imagined it. And as I started putting this together, I realized this isn't my story. This isn't just my story to share. God wanted me to share how consistently he has shown up in my life and the grace that he's given me and the mercy, even at times when maybe I didn't think I deserved it. And when he has consistently led me on his path and brought me back when I have veered away, he has been consistently faithful to me. And in my lessons of learning to surrender to God and being in this room and sharing my story this way to this camera, this is how he wanted it done. And so I surrendered. And I just wanted to share with you that as I'm trying to be faithful, and I'm not every time, and there's definitely times I want to say no or go the other way. I don't know if it was something I heard here or somewhere else, but I remember someone telling me that these are some ways to help keep the faith. And it's the acronym FLOW, F-L-O-W. And that the F is for faith. Place your faith actively in God. L for love. Love God and love others without judgment. O is obey God in his timing. That's my surrendering. And W is worship. Worship God with a thankful heart. I hope that that can be helpful for you as you keep your faith and you let it flow. I remember someone gave me a word not too long ago, and she was describing how God wanted me to have faith, and she described it as if we were in like a storage facility, and when you step forward, the sensor goes off in the light, and so your path in front of you lights up, but the next path is dark until you step out in faith, and then that part of the path will light up again. And that just really stuck with me, just knowing that we need to step forward even when it's dark and even when it's unknown, and he will shine his light on that path, and he'll shine our light on our next steps, but that we need to be willing to move forward and take that step. As it says in 2 Corinthians 5:7, for we walk by faith, not by sight. You know, we may not know exactly where we're going or where that's going to take us, and there's many of those areas in my life right now. But I pray that we can all walk in faith. So let's pray. Heavenly Father, we come before you today with gratitude. In the midst of everything going on, you still find a way to bring your people together and to share your stories of faithfulness. We pray that you fill our stories with your gracious and abundant mercy and love. As we look back on our own life story, we pray that you bring us clarity and we see your presence and the role you played in our story in a way we haven't before. We see your faithfulness when we mistook it for failure. We see your faithfulness when we mistook it for a broken relationship. We see your faithfulness when we misspoke or acted unlike our true self. We see your faithfulness when we acted in fear and doubt. Lord, heal those places and spaces that cause us to lose our faith. Bind and reject the enemy and the deceitful ways he tries to manipulate our hearts and minds. Keep us strong in the faith. Keep our minds set on the things above and level out our peaks and valleys. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Well, thank you, Teryn. Thank you for sharing just a story of what it looks like to live a life of obedience and surrender to Jesus. And I love how your story reminds us that the Lord equips us for what he's called us to do. Just reminds us of the power that there is in prayer. And honestly reminds us that even though our life doesn't always look like we thought it would, that God is always trustworthy, he is always faithful, and he is always good. So thank you for sharing that with us. And you are going to want to come back next week, friends, when our friend Christy Showerman is going to be here to close out our season of Real Life Stories. So we look forward to having you join us again. Good night.